Elias Vance believed in the quiet order of things. His life was a testament to it, a carefully curated collection of silent moments and gentle routines. His small apartment smelled of old paper and Earl Grey tea, its walls lined with books that stood in neat, disciplined rows like soldiers of thought. He was an archivist for the city, a man who spent his days preserving the brittle, forgotten stories of the past, his touch so light it barely disturbed the dust. He was, by all accounts, a man who moved through the world without making ripples. That was why the chaos felt so alien, so profoundly wrong. It happened on a Tuesday evening, under the jaundiced glow of streetlights on a street far fancier than his own. He had treated himself to a new hardcover edition of Roman history, its weight a comforting presence in his canvas tote bag alongside a carton of milk and a loaf of rye bread. The air was crisp, carrying the distant siren song of the city, a sound Elias had long ago learned to tune out in favor of his own thoughts. He was contemplating the fall of the Western Roman Empire when a figure barreled into him. There was no warning, just a sudden, jarring impact that sent his tote bag flying. The hardcover book landed with a sickening thud on the pavement. The carton of milk burst open, a splash of white blooming across the dark concrete like a ghostly flower. Elias stumbled, catching his balance against a brick wall. He looked up to see a man in a suit so sharp it could have cut glass. The man, who had been barking into a phone pressed to his ear, lowered it with a look of pure, unadulterated fury. "Watch where you're going, you idiot," the man snarled, his voice a low growl of privilege. Elias, still blinking from the shock, looked from the man's furious face to the ruin of his groceries and his beloved new book. A corner of its beautiful cover was now brutally dented. A simple apology was all that was needed. A simple, "My apologies, I wasn't looking." But that was not what happened next. "I believe you were the one not looking," Elias said, his voice quiet but steady. It was not an accusation, simply a statement of fact. The man's face, already flushed with anger, darkened to a dangerous shade of crimson. Who was this nobody, this shabby man in a worn coat, to question him? He took a menacing step forward. "What did you just say to me?" From the man's perspective, Marcus Thorne's perspective, the world was a hierarchy, and he was firmly at the top. An unexpected inconvenience like this was not a mistake. It was an insult, a challenge to his dominion over the very sidewalk he walked upon. He saw Elias not as a person, but as an obstacle that had dared to speak. "I said," Elias repeated, his calmness acting like fuel on the fire of the man's rage, "that you walked into me. An apology would be appropriate." Marcus Thorne laughed, a short, ugly sound. "An apology? You're lucky I don't have you arrested for harassment." He jabbed a finger into Elias's chest, a hard, violating poke. "Now get out of my way before you really have a problem." Elias did not flinch, but he did not move. He stood his ground, a quiet pillar of defiance. He had spent his life in the service of facts, of recorded truths. To concede to such a blatant lie felt like a betrayal of his very essence. That quiet refusal was the final spark. What happened next was a blur of violence. Marcus shoved Elias hard with both hands. Elias staggered backward, his hands coming up instinctively to shield his face. It was a defensive gesture, nothing more. But to the few onlookers who had just begun to notice the confrontation, it could have been misread. Marcus saw the hands come up and his rage boiled over. He threw a heavy, wild punch that caught Elias on the jaw. Pain exploded in Elias's head, bright and hot. The world tilted sideways as he fell, his shoulder hitting the hard pavement. The last thing he saw before the world swam out of focus was Marcus Thorne stepping back, pulling out his phone again, his face a mask of calculated victimhood as he dialed 911. The victim was on the ground, but the call was for him. The wail of the siren grew from a distant cry to a deafening shriek. When Elias finally pushed himself into a sitting position, his head throbbing, Two police officers were standing over him. One of them, a man whose name tag read Miller, had his hand resting on his sidearm. His gaze was cold, clinical, and already made up. Marcus Thorne was pointing, his expensive suit immaculate save for a single speck of milk. "That's him, officer," he said, his voice laced with manufactured terror. "He came out of nowhere, tried to rob me. When I resisted, he attacked me." Officer Miller's eyes flicked from Marcus's tailored suit to Elias's worn coat and the spilled groceries. He saw a story he'd seen 100 times. A story he thought he knew by heart. The well-dressed, respectable citizen assaulted by the desperate street vagrant. The lines were drawn, the roles cast in the hard plastic of his prejudice. "Sir, are you all right?" Miller asked Marcus, his tone dripping with concern. "I'm shaken, but I'll be fine," Marcus said, playing the part to perfection. "I just want him off the streets." Miller turned his gaze back to Elias, all sympathy gone, replaced by a granite-hard suspicion. "On your feet," he commanded. Elias rose slowly, his jaw aching with a deep, pulsing pain. He could feel the eyes of the bystanders on him, their gazes a mixture of fear and condemnation. He was being tried and convicted on the pavement. "Officer," Elias began, his voice hoarse, "that's not what happened. He assaulted me." "Save it," Miller snapped, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. The cold metal clicked shut around Elias's wrists, the sound unnervingly final. "You have the right to remain silent." The humiliation was a physical force, pressing down on his chest, stealing his breath. He was being arrested. He, Elias Vance, the quiet archivist, was being arrested for assault. The irony was so bitter it tasted like bile. As he was led to the squad car, a small crowd parting before him as if he were a contagion, he caught Marcus Thorne's eye. The man gave him a small, triumphant smirk. It was a look that said, "I won. The world believes me, not you." The night in the holding cell was a descent into a cold, concrete hell. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and despair. Every surface was hard, every sound an echo. Elias sat on the thin mattress, the throbbing in his jaw a constant reminder of the injustice. It wasn't just the physical pain. It was the psychic wound, the feeling of his reality being ripped apart and replaced with a grotesque fiction. He had told his story calmly and rationally during the booking process. He explained who he was, what he did for a living, and the precise sequence of events. The officer behind the desk had typed with 2 fingers, his expression one of profound boredom, not even bothering to make eye contact. Elias Vance was no longer a person. He was a case number, a set of allegations on a screen. Assault. Attempted robbery. The words were absurd, alien. The next day he met his public defender, a young woman with tired eyes and a stack of files so high it threatened to topple over. She listened with a practiced sort of patience, but Elias could see the calculus happening behind her eyes. One man's word against another's. And the other man was Marcus Thorne, a prominent real estate developer whose name was frequently in the city's business journal. "Mr. Thorne has no criminal record and is a respected member of the community," she said, her tone flat. "You, on the other hand, have no witnesses to corroborate your version of events. The prosecution is offering a plea deal. Trespass and disorderly conduct. Time served, a small fine. It goes away and you get to go home." "But I'm innocent," Elias said, the words feeling flimsy and inadequate. "He attacked me." "I believe you," she said, though her tone suggested it was a professional courtesy rather than a genuine conviction. "But believing you and proving it in court are 2 very different things. A jury will see a wealthy man and you. It's a risk, Mr. Vance." The pressure to surrender was immense. To accept the lesser lie to escape the greater one. To stain his own name just to reclaim his freedom. It was a devil's bargain, and it made him feel sick. For 2 days, he wrestled with it. The quiet order of his life shattered. replaced by a grinding, anxious uncertainty. The system that was meant to find the truth seemed interested only in the most convenient story. Meanwhile, in a different part of the city, a detective was brewing her third cup of coffee for the day. Detective Isabella Rossi was a details person. She believed that truth wasn't found in the broad strokes of a story, but in the tiny, overlooked inconsistencies. The case file for the assault charge against Elias Vance landed on her desk as a routine review. It should have been a simple open-and-shut case, but something about it bothered her. It was the victim's statement. Marcus Thorne's account was too polished, too perfect. He used phrases that sounded rehearsed. And then there was the accused, Elias Vance, an archivist, 42 years old. Not so much as a parking ticket to his name. Rossi had seen her share of violence, and men who dedicated their lives to preserving brittle 100-year-old documents did not, as a rule, suddenly decide to become muggers in their 40s. Felt wrong. The pieces didn't fit. She pulled up Officer Miller's bodycam footage from the scene. She saw his immediate deference to Thorne, his dismissive tone with Vance. She saw the assumptions being made in real time. It wasn't malicious, not exactly. It was worse. It was automatic. A cognitive shortcut that had led to a man in handcuffs. There has to be more to this, she muttered to her empty office. Her first call was to the city archives. The director, a flustered woman named Mrs. Gable, was aghast. Elias Vance? Arrested? For assault? That's the most preposterous thing I've ever heard. The man handles 18th century manuscripts as if they were sleeping babies. He wouldn't harm a fly. Character witnesses were good, but they weren't evidence. Rossi went back to the location of the incident. She stood on the sidewalk where Elias had fallen, picturing the scene. She looked around, her eyes scanning not for people, but for lenses. Banks, storefronts, apartment buildings. Her gaze settled on a sleek, black dome mounted discreetly on the facade of a newly renovated luxury condo building across the street. It was a high-end surveillance camera, the kind that captured everything in crisp, unforgiving detail. Getting the warrant was a bureaucratic hurdle, but Rossi pushed. She had a gut feeling, a detective's intuition that screamed at her that the official story was a fabrication. She told her lieutenant that proceeding to trial without checking that camera would be malpractice. He grumbled, but he signed the papers. 2 days later, Detective Rossi sat in a darkened viewing room with the assistant district attorney, a man named Henderson who had been ready to railroad Elias Vance with the plea deal. The footage appeared on the large monitor. It was wide-angle, perfectly clear. The timestamp in the corner corresponded to the exact time of the incident. They watched in silence. There was Elias walking calmly, his tote bag swinging gently. There was Marcus Thorne, striding like he owned the world, phone glued to his ear, completely oblivious. They saw the collision, clearly Thorne's fault. They saw the milk explode across the pavement. Henderson let out a low whistle. They watched as Elias spoke, his posture calm, non-threatening. They saw Marcus Thorne's face contort with rage. They saw him jab his finger into Elias's chest. They saw him deliver the two-handed shove. And then they saw it, the undeniable, unprovoked punch that sent Elias to the ground. They saw Elias's hands come up a split second before the impact, a desperate, futile attempt to block the blow. The footage continued to play. It showed Marcus Thorne stepping back, composing himself, and making the call, his body language shifting from aggressor to victim in a masterful, chilling performance. It was all there. Every lie, every detail. The silent, digital I had been the only impartial witness, and its testimony was absolute. For a long moment after the video ended, the room was silent. Henderson slowly took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked over at Rossi, his expression a mixture of shock and grim embarrassment. "Well," he said, his voice quiet, "this changes everything." It didn't just change everything. It flipped the entire case on its head. Within the hour, The wheels of justice, which had been grinding so cruelly against Elias, began to turn in the opposite direction, now with astonishing speed. The assistant DA personally called the judge to have all charges against Elias Vance dismissed with prejudice. The words echoed with a finality that felt like thunder. Gross miscarriage of justice. What happened next was a cascade of consequences. Warrants were issued not just for the arrest of Marcus Thorne on charges of felony assault and filing a false police report, but also for a formal investigation into Officer Miller's conduct, including potential perjury for his sworn statement. The arrest of Marcus Thorne was a thing of poetic justice. Two detectives, one of them Rossi, walked into the glass and chrome lobby of Thorne Development. They didn't wait for him to come down. They took the elevator to the penthouse floor, striding past a stunned receptionist and into a lavish office with a panoramic view of the city. Marcus was on a conference call laughing about some deal. He looked up, annoyed at the interruption. His smile vanished when he saw Detective Rossi's grim face. "Marcus Thorne," she said, her voice clear and carrying across the room. "You're under arrest for assault." His arrogance, so potent on the street, now curdled into disbelief. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered, looking at his assistants as if they could somehow make the officers disappear. "There's been a mistake. I was the victim." "We have the video, Mr. Thorne," Rossi said calmly, holding up the handcuffs. "The whole thing, from start to finish." The color drained from his face. The mask of superiority shattered, revealing the panicked, petulant man beneath. For Elias, the news came not in a sterile courtroom, but in a small, quiet office. Detective Rossi had asked to meet him there. She slid a document across the table. It was the official dismissal of all charges. "On behalf of the department, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice sincere, "I want to offer you our deepest apologies. What happened to you was wrong. The system failed you." Elias looked at the paper, his fingers tracing the official seal. He didn't feel triumph or anger. He felt only a profound, bone-deep relief, like a man who had been holding his breath underwater for days and could finally surface. The weight that had been crushing him simply dissolved. "Thank you, Detective," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for looking for the truth." He walked out of the police station and into the afternoon sun, a free and innocent man. He returned to his apartment, to the scent of old paper and the quiet company of his books. The silence was different now. It was not the silence of isolation or despair. It was the silence of peace, of order restored. The story did not end there. Someone within the DA's office, disgusted by the initial injustice, leaked the security footage to a local news station. By nightfall, it was the lead story. By the next morning, it had gone viral. The video was devastatingly effective. Everyone could see the truth for themselves. They saw the quiet dignity of Elias and the explosive arrogance of Marcus Thorne. The clip became a symbol, a digital parable for the modern age. It was played on national news, dissected by legal analysts, and shared millions of times on social media with hashtags like #JusticeForElias and #TruthInPlainSight. Elias Vance, the man who moved without making ripples, had inadvertently started a tidal wave. The police department, facing a public relations nightmare, fast-tracked a new training program on implicit bias and de-escalation, using the footage of Officer Miller's snap judgment as a core example of what not to do. Miller was ultimately fired, his career a casualty of his own prejudice. Marcus Thorne's life imploded. He was convicted, his wealth unable to shield him from the undeniable video evidence. He lost his company, his reputation, and his freedom, sentenced to a year in prison. A fate he had so callously tried to inflict on an innocent man. His downfall was as public as his ego had once been. Elias, in contrast, was inundated with support. A local bookstore gifted him a new copy of the history book he'd lost. A GoFundMe started by a stranger raised thousands of dollars, to restore his faith in humanity. He politely declined the money, asking that it be donated to legal aid services. He gave only one brief interview. He sat not in a television studio, but in the familiar comfort of the city archives, surrounded by the silent history he so loved. "I don't want this to be about me," he told the reporter, his voice as calm and steady as ever. "I just hope it reminds people to wait, to listen, to look for the whole story before they decide who is the hero and who is the villain. A person's worth isn't determined by the clothes they wear or the title they hold. It's in their character. The truth was always there. It just needed someone to be willing to look for it." In the end, Elias Vance's life returned to its quiet rhythm. He went back to his work, his hands once again tending to the fragile pages of the past. But he was not the same. He had been dragged into the chaotic, unjust machinery of the world and had emerged, not unscathed, but unbroken. He had learned that quietness was not weakness, and that one man, armed only with his integrity, could face down a lie and win. His story serves as a powerful reminder for all of us. It teaches us that injustice thrives on assumption and prejudice. It proves that the truth, no matter how buried, has a way of finding the light. The footage didn't just exonerate one man. It exposed a deeper flaw in how we see each other. So the next time you witness an event, the next time you hear one side of a story, remember Elias Vance. Remember to pause, to question, and to resist the easy narrative. Because judging a book by its cover can do more than just cause you to miss a good story. It can help convict an innocent man. Share this story if you believe that everyone deserves to have their true story seen. Because in a world of snap judgments, patience is an act of justice, and seeking the truth is an act of courage.